Hi everyone, this is Germinal Van, founder of the GGV Publishing Podcast. Today we are going to talk about a very important subject that I think is essential to address, especially to clarify in people's minds so that they will finally understand that democracy is not freedom. And for those who have been following my work and know me, they know that I am not a strong proponent of democracy. I think democracy is one of the worst political systems to exist. And I'm going to explain in this episode why democracy is bad. It is certainly not the worst. The worst is, of course, tyranny, a totalitarian government. But democracy it was classified among the worst forms of government. So here's the thing, right? The idea that democracy is the best government is perhaps, to me at least, like one of the biggest lies ever told to people who live in a liberal democracy. So people in the United States, Canada, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, so all the Western countries that we know, including Japan, which is not a Western country, but it has adopted the political values of the Western world. So these countries, people living in these countries claim that democracy is the best type of government because it promotes freedom. And now people believe that. People think that if they live in a democracy, therefore they're free. It's true that people who live in a democracy are free, but it is not because of democracy that they're free. So that's what I'm going to try to explain in this episode. In my opinion, I think equating democracy with freedom is only to a certain political power, and politicians love to do that. They love to equate democracy with freedom because it makes people think that voting, specifically the right to vote, is what makes them free. But before I get into the right to vote, I will first talk about democracy itself. So, people in the United States tend to claim that America is a democracy. For example, when the attacks of January 6th happened, mainstream media claimed that it was an attempt on American democracy. No, America is not a democracy. The United States is not a democracy. It is a republic. In fact, the word democracy was never written, not even once, in the US Constitution. I can challenge any person to show me where in the US Constitution it was written, the word democracy was written. And the founding fathers did that on purpose. They were very distrustful of democracy because it is, in essence, the tyranny of the majority. And the very essence of democracy is majority rule, right? So that means that if the 51% of the population has decided on something and the other 49 do not agree, well, the voice of the 49% will be overruled by that of the 51%. So the United States of America is a republic that contains democratic elements. That's the key distinction here. And I believe it is important to distinguish the two. What is a democracy and what is a republic? So a republic is a representative form of government that is ruled by a constitution or a charter, right? And a democracy, on the other hand, is a government that is ruled by the will of the majority. And the substantial difference between the two types of government is that in a republic, the rights of the minority are protected under the constitution or the charter. And this is because a republic emphasizes individual rights, whereas in a democracy, the rights of the minority are undermined. And let me give you a very classic example of a pure raw democracy. And that is the Jim Crow laws, right? So during the Jim Crow era, black people had virtually no rights because of the rule of the majority that was applied in sovereign states, although black people were citizens of the United States. And the U.S. Constitution grants a set of rights to any person who is a citizen of this country. And yet, black people, when they were living in the South, they were not allowed to have rights. They were literally treated as subhumans. And we, of course, know that, sovereign states were mostly populated by whites, and they were opposed to any type of laws that would enable blacks to be socioeconomically emancipated. So as a result, blacks had to leave those sovereign states if they wanted to have better economic conditions to improve their lives. That was pure democracy. So if the majority that live in, let's say, for example, South Carolina are white, and they say we don't want those Negroes to be emancipated, we don't want to give them the right to do X, Y, Z. If 51% of them said we don't want that, it was not happening, and that's exactly what happened. And the sovereign states, the government of the sovereign states, so whether South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, or whatever, those states did not do anything to protect the rights of black people living there. It was a pure democracy. And we saw, and it compelled black people to leave, to go to the West, so pretty much to California for better economic opportunities, or in the Midwest, or even on the East Coast. So it is important to understand that the United States, in fact, is a democratic republic. It is democratic in the sense that the people get to elect their representatives, right? And it is a republic because the Constitution protects the rights of the individual at the expense of government expanding its power. And I'm going to talk now about the philosophical aspect of democracy. And for that, I have to talk about the man who wrote that book called Politics. His name is Aristotle. Anyone who went to college and took philosophy 101 or 102 knows about Aristotle, right? So Aristotle wrote a book called Politics, in where he argued that there were three categories of good government and three categories of bad government. The three categories of good government are the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the polity. And the three kinds of bad government are tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. And Aristotle believed that democracy was not the best form of government. He called democracy a deviant constitution because he thought that it served the interests of the poor. Aristotle defined corrupt or illegitimate regimes as those where the rulers rule in their own interest. He believed that democracy and oligarchy pitted the rich against the poor. So the central point here about Aristotle's distrust of democracy is that it is a system that promotes the rule of the common people in their own interest over the common good, which conflicts with the purpose of any state. So the state exists to promote the common good. The common good is defined by how we understand what could be the collective purposes. Personally, I don't believe there is a collective purpose. I believe society is not a organic unit independent of the individual that make it up. I think I think society is contingent to the individuals that make up that society. Society exists because of individuals. So individuals have goals. Society doesn't have goals. But the purpose of the state is to protect the rights of the individual. And mob rule, which is the rule of the majority, leads to the oppression of minorities or the enactment of detrimental policies. So we understand here that democracy is not a good thing. And the purpose of democracy, in fact, is equality of outcome. Whereas the purpose of the republic is equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity is best represented by the rule of law, because under the rule of law, all individuals are treated the same, at least theoretically. Whereas in a democracy, the mob pursues equality of outcome as the ultimate goal to achieve, and pursuing that goal means undermining individual rights. So if you have a group of people that is doing well economically, and most people don't, in a pure democracy, those who don't now, because they're the majority, they will be resentful. They're going to try to pass laws to say, okay, we got to punish those who are doing well. And that's not fair. Whereas in a republic, we have a system where we have laws that protect your ability to have access to opportunities. Of course, we were not born under the same circumstances. Some people were born in better circumstances with a lot of resources, and others are not. But it's not by taking what those who were born in better circumstances have that is going to equate the playing field for everyone else. Because at the end of the day, what in fact engineers inequality is how people allocate their resources. And people allocate their resources according to their choices, their preferences, and their values. It's based on those three criteria that we allocate our resources, and therefore we never produce the same outcome. So even if we try to level up the playing field for everyone else, people will still not be equal. So equality of outcome in itself, it's utopian. But now I'm going to talk about the illusion of freedom in a democracy, or should I say the illusion of freedom because of democracy. So the democratic elements incorporated in a republic are what confuse people and make them think that democracy is freedom. Some of these democratic elements are the ability to hold fair elections, having a pluralistic system of political parties and organizations, the separation of powers, etc. So, in other words, people's ability to vote. And democracy enables people to elect public officials. That's pretty much the only thing democracy does. And that's why American politicians love to use the word democracy. They say you need to go to the polls and vote to save democracy. But again, that is not what freedom is about. The right to elect one's government official does not guarantee a free society. That's the most important part to emphasize here. Again, let me repeat this, right? So the right to elect one's government officials does not guarantee a free society. Freedom is determined by the powers wielded by the government. If government powers are limited to their legitimate functions, then people in that society will be free. What are the legitimate functions of government? Is to protect the rights of the individuals, to adjudicate disputes, to have a military and a police so that people will not kill each other. That's pretty much what government exists for. Government exists for security purposes and to make sure that whatever dispute that is going on, we take it to court rather than resorting to violence, and that it will lead to even worse outcome. That's why government exists. And this is exactly why the founding fathers created a constitution that will substantively limit the powers of government. So government exists for those functions, to protect people's rights. That's it. And that's true whether government officials are democratically elected or not. So in other words, theoretically, an unelected regime could result in a freer country than a democratically elected one. An unelected regime, for example, could implement a free market economic system, while a democratic one could implement a welfare state or planned economy system, as has been the case in many European countries. Hitler, for example, was elected democratically, and yet the policies that he implemented derived, or should I say, deprived people of their liberties. So Germany under his leadership was not a free society, and then it became undemocratic. Eventually, it fell into a totalitarian regime. So the only real benefit that a democratic society system gives you is that people can peacefully change public officials. That's it. But that's not freedom. Yes, you vote one person instead of the other, but if that person you vote decide to increase government spending, decide to increase the money supply, decide to do XYZ, you're not free because those policies that that person is implementing is reducing your freedom. So the right to vote is not freedom because it does not ensure in any way, shape, or form that people will be free. Again, politicians love using the word democracy because they need votes to either gain political power or retain that power. So when politicians like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, in their speech talk about preserving our democracy, what they really imply is preserving their own power. Politicians use the word democracy to present themselves as the defenders of freedom and inculcate in the voters' mind that democracy is freedom. But of course, democracy is not freedom. They make the voters believe that their ability to vote demonstrate that they're free. The ordinary American, for example, falls for that kind of rhetoric because Americans are generally ill informed. They usually do not dig deep into the issues at stake. They put their faith in another person's hand to do the right thing while the person is simply pursuing his self-interest, using political power. So using semantics that rotate around democratic notions serve no one but only the one who is pursuing political power. So true freedom is when the policies implemented pertain to the liberalization of markets, meaning the enlargement of the private sector. Because the private sector is where individuals have the real ability to wield their freedom to its full extent. So a democratic government that imposes laws that restrict market and prevents people's ability to exercise their freedom isn't a government that promotes freedom. So I hope you guys finally understood that democracy and freedom are not the same thing. I can give you even another an example of a country that is free, but that is not a democracy. This is Rwanda. Rwanda politically is a dictatorship under the leadership of Kagame. But economically, Rwanda is a market-oriented society. People have plenty of freedoms when it comes to economics. They can start their own business. They have the right to property. Private property is very strong in a country like Rwanda. As a matter of fact, Rwanda is ranked pretty high among African countries that have a high index of property rights. So if you start a business in Rwanda, for example, you're sure that your property rights are safe there. Although politically, people don't have any freedom. But that shows again that in Rwanda people are free, although they do not have political rights. But because political rights, in fact, doesn't change anything. Political rights do not improve the lives of people. What improves the lives of people is permissive laws, laws that allow people to take risk, laws that allow people to pursue their self-interest, laws that allow people to do what they think is best for them. That's what freedom is. It's not about the peaceful transfer of power. It's not about voting someone in office that shows that you're free. So I hope you guys now understood the difference between a democracy and a republic and why democracy is not freedom. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And in the next episode, I will talk about the right to vote specifically and why I personally believe that the right to vote is actually not a right but a privilege, and it's a privilege that should be earned. It should not be granted to everyone. The person who wants to vote must show why he deserves to vote. Basically, what I'm implying here is that the privilege to vote should be meritocratic. You must deserve to vote and not be granted to vote just because. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I see you guys next time.